The Earth died quickly after the Great War. The seas were deserts of radioactive dust. The skies choked by clouds of poison gas. But beyond the wastelands,
What do you get when you have less money than the original Terminator from 1994 and you put a little influence of Blade Runner in your movie? Well, that question would be answered by the movie Hardware or Mark 13, which is a 1990 horror sci-fi movie. I would call it like a splatterpunk and a cyberpunk movie. It's a fusion of the movies I've talked before, Terminator and Blade Runner. But also it has its own original sides, and also it has it's one of those movies that it's in the subgenre of bottle movie, because most of the movie happens inside of a futuristic dystopian apartment. And I got to say that I seen this movie a long time ago. Well, I saw just a scene when I was switching between channels on my TV. I think it was very late in the evening, and I got to see the scene with uh, the the sliding doors. If other people know this horror movie, so there is a sliding door scene in this movie that is I think one of the most memorable scenes in the movie. And why did I want, so after many times, after many years, I resaw it, I think back in 2010, and when I resaw it I was like, it's this movie that I saw it when I was a kid, and now that I resaw it, I didn't have that much of impact on me, the movie. And now I resaw it for so this would be my third time that I see this movie. And to be sincere, I think I got better enjoyment out of it than my second time. Um, this movie is very good if you're a horror, especially horror sci-fi fan. The movie is about a robot that so they initially find just the head and one hand of this robot, which is like Terminator, and he can reconstruct his body. So that's the difference between him and the Terminator. He can reconstruct his body, and he's a killing machine. And there's like two pretty gory scenes in this movie, but there are also scenes of comedy, if I may say so. If it's like dark comedy, there are some dark comedy scenes in this movie. Also, another reason that I wanted to re-see this movie was because of Richard Stanley. Richard Stanley is a director that at a certain time in history he was like considered the new hot director that will have amazing success in Hollywood, but sadly his career was ended because of The Island of Dr. Moreau. And if people ever seen that movie, they probably know uh, how horrible that movie is. And there was like a documentary made about this disaster of a movie, The Island of Dr. Moreau. there was a documentary that presents what happened. It's called Lost Soul: The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. And this guy suffered a lot during production of that movie because egos clashing between Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer. I'm gonna let you guys maybe find out more for yourselves. I'm not gonna get into detail for that documentary or the Island of Dr. Moreau movie. So I was like on this kick to see. I think this was like the first movie that made him famous, and then I'll talk in my second review about his last movie that he did a year ago and released it in 2020, Color Out of Space. And I have to say that the movie is very beautifully shot. So Richard Stanley really is a very good director, especially when a very good visual director. He knew how to play with the color red and neon. He really knows how to play into his budget. So this movie kind of costed like $1 million, and there are a lot of scenes that you can see how low budget the movie is, but at the same time I have to respect this movie because the guy knew how to do a lot with not that many money on him. And why do I say that it's a little influenced by Blade Runner? Because some scenes really look like they were taken out of Blade Runner. How he presents the clothes of the post apocalypse, and some of the backgrounds and the characters. It really reminded me. Although I'd say most of the time this movie is influenced by Terminator, because the main antagonist, the main villain of the movie is the Mark 13 killing robot that is very hard to kill, in the vein of Terminator, but this time this robot is so hard to kill because it can reconstruct itself. So that was a very interesting detail they introduced to take themselves apart, to differentiate themselves from the Terminator. At the same time, the gore was much, much more excessive than in Terminator. So the guy is clearly like a horror buff, Richard Stanley, and I also really liked the soundtrack of this movie. There were some very electronica pieces that I liked, and some classical or baroque songs that I really like. So I really recommend to give the original soundtrack a go. Also, Richard Stanley, I think he has like a lot of rocker friends, because in this movie, Iggy Pop makes a voice cameo as a radio DJ. Also, Carl McCoy from Winds of Nephilim, I think the band is called. Fields of Nephilim, yes, Carl McCoy, and Lemmy from Motorhead makes a cameo as a taxi driver who puts on one of Motorhead songs on. So yeah, I think Richard Stanley has very, very good rocker connections. So I really recommend the movie for the soundtrack, and also I'm kind of a fan of bottle movies that happen in one backdrop. I also talked about bottle movies in my review for the platform El Hoyo. I also recommend you guys listening to that review if you want to get more informed of bottle movies. One of the criticisms that I would have for this movie is because of its low budget nature, the robot um, it's not really. I think I had some issues with the design of the robot, and I think parts of my issues were because of the low budget. Maybe they couldn't build um, more complicated robot as they would have wished for with their budget. And also you could see some scenes that they tried to hide as much as possible the robot, so you couldn't see the low budgeted nature of the movie. The actors played really good. One of the most famous actors in this movie, I'd say it's Dylan McDermott, who played this role, the role of kind of the main protagonist. He played it really good, although I think this movie is kind of more the movie of the second main character of Jill, played by Stacey Travis. She also did a very good job. Um, yeah, I'd really recommend this movie to horror buffs and sci-fi buffs. It's one of those movies that if you went to a Blockbuster, to a VHS shop, and you would have rented this movie, I think you wouldn't have gotten disappointed. I'd give this movie like 7.2 out of 10. Thank you for listening.